Picture this. 1501, and the most powerful spiritual leader in Christianity is hosting a party at the Vatican. But this isn't your typical religious gathering. 50 courtesans are dancing naked, while Vatican cardinals crawl on the floor collecting chestnuts, with prizes awarded for whoever can have relations with the most women. This actually happened, and the man who hosted it? Pope Alexander VI, the so-called representative of God on earth. What's up, history lovers? Welcome back to Epic Renaissance. Today, we are delving into the 8 worst popes of the Renaissance Catholic Church. The Renaissance was an age of rebirth, beauty, and enlightenment. But there was a dark underbelly to this golden age, and nowhere was it darker than at the very heart of the Catholic Church. While popes were supposed to be spiritual shepherds guiding the faithful, many Renaissance popes were more interested in power, pleasure, and cold, hard cash. They fathered illegitimate children, led armies into battle, poisoned their enemies, and sold salvation to the highest bidders. These aren't myths or Protestant propaganda. These are documented historical facts that scandalized even the people of their own time. So, buckle up, because we're about to meet 8 men who wore the papal tiara while living lives that would make a mob boss blush. At number 8, Julius III, who came to power right when the Catholic Church desperately needed reform. Martin Luther's Reformation was in full swing. Protestantism was spreading like wildfire, and the church needed a leader who could inspire spiritual renewal. Instead, they got Julius III, a man more interested in banquets than theology. Julius had been a serious candidate at previous conclaves because people thought he'd continue the reforming Council of Trent, which was the Catholic Church's response to the Protestant Reformation. He did continue it, technically, but his heart wasn't in it. He was far more interested in hosting lavish parties at his newly constructed Villa Giulia, commissioning art, and generally living the high life. But here's where things get really dark. Before becoming pope, Julius had allegedly become infatuated with a teenage boy named Innocenzo. The boy had been working as a beggar on the streets when Julius, then a cardinal, took him in. After becoming pope, Julius adopted Innocenzo and made him a cardinal at age 17 and showered him with wealth and privileges. Contemporary accounts describe the relationship as scandalously inappropriate, and it became one of the most talked about controversies of his papacy. Whether the relationship was sexual or just deeply inappropriate favoritism, it was a PR disaster for a church trying to clean up its image. Here was the Pope, at the moment of existential crisis for Catholicism, creating scandals that gave ammunition to Protestant critics who already claimed the papacy was corrupt beyond all redemption. At number 7, Paul III presents us with one of the great contradictions of the Renaissance papacy. On the one hand, he convened the Council of Trent, which launched the Catholic Counter-Reformation. He approved the Jesuits, commissioned Michelangelo's Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel, and took genuine steps toward reform. On the other hand, he was the poster child for everything wrong with the Renaissance Church. Before becoming pope, Alessandro Farnese had a lovely mistress named Silvia Ruffini, with whom he had 4 children: Pierluigi, Paolo, Ranuccio, and Costanza. He wasn't shy about this either. Everyone knew about his kids. In fact, his enemies nicknamed him Cardinal Petticoat because rumors suggested his sister Giulia's relationship with Pope Alexander VI had helped his career. Whether that's true or not, the nickname stuck. Once Paul III had the papal tiara on his head, he went into full family advancement mode. He made his 14-year-old grandson, Alessandro, a cardinal, 14 years old. He also made his 16-year-old grandson, Guido, a cardinal. These weren't mature young men with theological training. They were literally children. Paul handed out duchies, titles, and territories to his family as if he were dealing cards at a poker game. The irony is delicious and tragic. Here's a pope who recognized the church needed reform, who understood that Protestant criticisms of Catholic corruption had merit, and who took real steps to address those problems. Yet, he couldn't stop himself from exhibiting the same exact behavior that fueled those criticisms in the first place. It's like an alcoholic opening a rehab center and then drinking on the job. At number 6, Sixtus IV gave us the Sistine Chapel, so at least he has that going for him. But he also gave us one of the most vicious examples of Renaissance papal politics. Sixtus was obsessed with advancing his nephew Girolamo Riario's political career. When the Medici family of Florence stood in the way of his nephew's ambitions, Sixtus gave his blessings to one of the most infamous assassinations of the Renaissance, the Pazzi conspiracy. On April 26, 1478, during High Mass at Florence Cathedral, assassins struck. They murdered Giuliano de' Medici right there in the church, stabbing him 19 times while the congregation watched in horror. They also attacked his brother Lorenzo, who barely escaped with his life. The conspiracy failed to overthrow the Medici, but the fact that the Pope was implicated in planning a murder during Mass shocked even the jaded power players of Renaissance Italy. Sixtus' nepotism was legendary, even by Renaissance standards. He appointed 6 of his nephews as cardinals, and that's using nephew generously because at least 2 of them were probably his illegitimate sons. He gave another nephew command of the papal armies and made him ridiculously wealthy. The word nepotism literally comes from the Italian nipote, meaning nephew, because of popes like Sixtus who constantly promoted their nephews. But wait, there's more. Sixtus also licensed brothels in Rome and collected taxes on prostitution. Yes, you read that right. The spiritual leader of Christianity was essentially running a protection racket on the world's oldest profession. He justified it as better to have prostitution regulated and taxed than uncontrolled. But still, the optics were not great. Hey, if you're finding value in these Renaissance narratives we're bringing to light, we'd be deeply grateful if you'd consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue uncovering these remarkable historical stories and ensures they reach fellow history enthusiasts, so smash that subscribe button. At number 5, Clement VII was born Giulio de' Medici, and he was illegitimate, which should have disqualified him from the papacy according to church law. But rules were more like guidelines in the Renaissance, especially if you were a Medici with enough money and influence to bend them. Clement's papacy was a masterclass in political incompetence. He flip-flopped between supporting France and the Holy Roman Empire, alienating both sides. His indecisiveness and poor judgment directly led to one of the most traumatic events in papal history, the sack of Rome in 1527. Imperial troops, many of them Lutheran Germans with a grudge against the Pope, stormed Rome and went on a rampage that lasted months. They murdered priests, raped nuns, desecrated churches, and turned St. Peter's Basilica into a stable. Pope Clement VII barricaded himself in Castel Sant'Angelo while his city burned. When he finally emerged, Rome was a devastated shell of its former glory. Contemporary accounts describe streets filled with corpses and a city traumatized beyond recognition. But Clement's failures didn't stop there. When King Henry VIII of England wanted an annulment so he could marry Anne Boleyn, Clement dithered and delayed. He was caught between Henry's demands and political pressure from Henry's wife's nephew, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. His inability to make a decision led Henry to break with Rome entirely, creating the Church of England and removing an entire kingdom from papal authority. Imagine being so bad at your job that you accidentally create a whole new branch of Christianity. That's Clement VII's legacy. He inherited a papacy already struggling, and through sheer incompetence, made everything worse. At number 4, Giovanni de' Medici, son of Lorenzo de' Medici and cousin to Pope Clement VII, became Pope Leo X at age 37, and according to legend, he's celebrated by saying, "God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." Whether he actually said this is debated, but it captures his approach to being Pope perfectly. Leo X loved luxury. He loved banquets, hunting parties, theatrical performances, and lavish displays of wealth. He employed hundreds of servants and spent money as if it were going out of style. His coronation alone cost 1/7 of the papal treasury's reserves. He commissioned magnificent artworks, hosted famous artists and writers, and turned the Vatican into a cultural center. When the money ran out, Leo got creative. He sold church positions, created new church offices, specifically to sell them, and most infamously, ramped up the sale of indulgences. Indulgences were certificates that supposedly reduced your time in purgatory, and Leo needed a lot of money to finish building St. Peter's Basilica, so he aggressively sold them throughout Europe. Enter Martin Luther, a German monk who was absolutely appalled by this practice. On October 31st, 1517, Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg, attacking the sale of indulgences and questioning papal authority. Leo X dismissed Luther as a drunken German who will change his mind when he sobers up. Big mistake. Huge. Luther didn't change his mind. Instead, his ideas spread like wildfire. Leo X excommunicated Luther in 1521, but by then, it was too late. The Protestant Reformation was underway, and it would shatter Christian unity forever. Millions would leave the Catholic Church, religious wars would devastate Europe, and the medieval Catholic monopoly on Christianity would end. You could argue that Leo X's lavish lifestyle and aggressive fundraising didn't cause the Reformation. Deeper theological and political factors were at play. But Leo X's successes and his dismissive response to legitimate criticisms were gasoline on a fire that was already smoldering. He's the Pope who partied while Christianity burned. At number 3, we have Pope Innocent VIII, whose name is perhaps the most bitterly ironic in papal history. This is the man who fathered numerous children, sold the papacy piece by piece, and, most devastatingly, gave official church blessing to the witch hunts that would terrorize Europe for over 2 centuries and kill thousands of innocent people. Giovanni Battista Ciba became Pope Innocent VIII, which is an ironic name for a man who was anything but innocent. Innocent VIII didn't even pretend to follow the rules of clerical celibacy. He openly acknowledged his illegitimate children, at least 7 of them, possibly more. But all of Innocent's corruption, all his venality and nepotism, pales compared to what he did on December 5th, 1484, when he issued the papal bull, Desiring with Supreme Ardor. This document changed European history and condemned tens of thousands of innocent people to torture and death. Innocent's bull officially declared that witchcraft was real, that witches were operating throughout Germany and other regions, and that these inquisitors had full papal authority to hunt down, prosecute, and punish witches. Anyone who interfered with their work would face excommunication. Over the next 2.5 centuries, witch hunts killed somewhere between 40,000 and 60,000 people across Europe, with some estimates going as high as 100,000. About 75 to 80% of victims were women. Let those numbers sink in. Tens of thousands of people, mostly women, tortured and executed for a crime that didn't exist, with the blessing of the Catholic Church that originated with Innocent VIII. Why Innocent VIII is so dark? Because it's the darkness of bureaucratic evil, of monstrous institutional horror. He didn't personally kill anyone. He didn't personally torture women. He signed a document. He gave authorization. He created a legal and theological framework that others used to commit atrocities for centuries, proving that sometimes the worst atrocities come not from personal depravity, but from institutional authority wielding without wisdom, compassion, or accountability. At number 2, Giuliano della Rovere became Pope Julius II, and he had zero interest in being a peaceful shepherd. This man wanted conquest, glory, and territorial expansion. He became known as Il Papa Terribile, the fearsome Pope. In 1492, when Pope Innocent VIII died, Giuliano della Rovere was the favorite to win. He'd been accumulating favors and allies for years. He expected to be crowned Pope. He already mentally moved into the papal apartments. Then, Rodrigo Borgia made his move. Borgia didn't just campaign for votes. He bought them in the most brazen auction in papal history. Imagine Giuliano's rage. He'd spent 20 years positioning himself for this moment, and some Spanish upstart had stolen the papacy through pure bribery? The humiliation was unbearable. From that moment, Giuliano della Rovere dedicated his life to destroying Rodrigo Borgia, now Pope Alexander VI. Giuliano knew he couldn't stay in Rome under Alexander's rule. The new pope would eliminate rivals, and Giuliano was rival number 1. So, in 1494, Giuliano fled to France, beginning a nearly decade-long exile where he plotted Alexander's downfall with an obsession that bordered on madness. During these years, dark rumors swirled around both men. The Borgias were said to be poisoning their enemies with cantarella, but Giuliano was reportedly just as willing to use assassination and poison against Borgia allies. But Giuliano was patient. He knew Alexander was mortal. He maintained his network of allies, accumulated more wealth, and prepared for the moment Alexander would die. Then, on August 18, 1503, Giuliano got the news he'd been waiting 11 years to hear. Alexander VI was dead. On November 1st, 1503, after just one day of voting, Giuliano della Rovere became Pope Julius II. His first act? Systematic destruction of everything Borgia. Having destroyed the Borgias, Julius turned his attention to his real passion: war. This wasn't about defending the church. This was about conquest, glory, and building an empire. Julius's approach to being pope was essentially, what if a pope acted like Julius Caesar? He personally led armies, besieged cities, and spent vast amounts of church money on military campaigns. He was also shrewd politically. He manipulated the great powers of Europe with impressive skill, playing France against Spain, Venice against the Empire, constantly maneuvering for papal advantage. But while Julius projected strength, his body was rotting from syphilis, shameful proof of his sexual indulgence. The disease which he'd likely contracted years earlier was advancing. His skin was covered in sores and lesions. He suffered terrible pain. During papal ceremonies, witnesses noted the stench and the visible decay. Here's where Julius II becomes almost tragically ironic. This warmongering, syphilitic, revenge-obsessed pope commissioned some of the greatest art in human history. He hired Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling and later to design his tomb. He hired Raphael to paint the Vatican apartments, including the School of Athens, one of the most celebrated paintings ever created. He began the construction of the new St. Peter's Basilica, hiring Bramante as his chief architect. The rivalry between Giuliano della Rovere and Rodrigo Borgia, two of the darkest popes in history, defined an era. Both were brilliant, ruthless, and ambitious men who used the papacy for personal glory. Both fathered children and violated their vows. Both were willing to kill enemies. Both spent church money on personal projects. The difference? Borgia enjoyed corruption. Julius weaponized corruption for power. Borgia wanted pleasure and family advancement. Julius wanted glory and a historical legacy. Borgia was hedonistic evil. Julius was militaristic evil. And in the end, Julius won their decades-long war, not because he was moral, but because he was more patient, more strategic, and more willing to sacrifice everything for victory. That's the real darkness of Julius II. And here we are, number 1, the darkest pope in history, Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia. If you've seen the Borgias on TV, you know this family's name is synonymous with corruption, poison, incest, and murder. But the real story is somehow even worse than fiction. Unlike most cardinals who at least pretended piety, Rodrigo Borgia openly lived like a Renaissance prince. He had multiple mistresses, fathered numerous illegitimate children, and hosted legendary parties featuring courtesans, dancing, and gambling. Pope Pius II once wrote Rodrigo a letter, rebuking him for his conduct at a party in Siena, where witnesses described an orgy that shocked even jaded Renaissance sensibilities. In 1492, Rodrigo decided he wanted to be pope. The conclave that followed was the most brazenly corrupt in history. Rodrigo didn't just bribe cardinals, he auctioned the papacy. He promised Cardinal Ascanio Sforza 4 mule loads of silver, the position of vice-chancellor, and his own palace. To others, he offered castles, territories, bishoprics, and cash. By the time voting ended, Rodrigo had bought enough votes to become Pope Alexander VI. As Pope, Alexander VI didn't even pretend to be celibate. His mistress, Giulia Farnese, lived in the Vatican and was openly referred to as the Bride of Christ, a title that should have belonged to the church itself. Romans sarcastically called her Giulia la Bella, Giulia the Beautiful. Pope Alexander commissioned a painting of the Virgin Mary with Giulia Farnese's face. He literally had his mistress depicted as the mother of Jesus. The blasphemy is almost impressive in its audacity. Alexander immediately installed his children in positions of power, shattering any pretense that this would be a normal papacy. His son, Cesare, yes, that's Cesare Borgia, the inspiration for Machiavelli's The Prince, became a cardinal at 18, despite having no religious vocation. He famously said he would prefer to be the first swordsman of Italy than a priest. Cesare later left the cardinalate to become a military commander and conquered territory for the Borgias through assassination, betrayal, and warfare. His other son, Juan, became Duke of Gandia and commander of the papal armies. His sister, Lucrezia Borgia, served as papal secretary when Alexander was away, essentially running the Catholic Church. She also became a political pawn, married and divorced multiple times to cement alliances. But the real darkness of Alexander's papacy came from what happened next. The rumors surrounding the Borgias were wild, even by Renaissance standards. They were accused of poisoning dinner guests who stood in their way. The cantarella poison, allegedly used by the Borgias, became legendary. While some accusations were probably exaggerated by enemies, enough people died suspiciously around the Borgias that even neutral observers were suspicious. Then, there's the banquet of chestnuts I mentioned in the introduction. In October of 1501, Alexander VI allegedly hosted an orgy at the Vatican. According to the diary of Johannes Burchard, the papal master of ceremonies, 50 courtesans danced naked while Vatican officials crawled on the floor collecting chestnuts. Prizes of silk cloaks and shoes were awarded to men who could have relations with the most women. Whether this event happened exactly as described is debated, but the fact that it was recorded by the Pope's own official and that people found it believable tells you everything about Alexander VI's reputation. Alexander VI used his position to enrich his family, eliminate enemies, and satisfy his appetites. He exemplified everything wrong with the Renaissance papacy. In August 1503, Alexander and Cesare both became violently ill after dining with Cardinal Adriano de Corneto. Alexander died on August 18, age 72. Cesare survived but was incapacitated. Rumors immediately spread that they'd been poisoned, possibly by enemies, possibly by their own cantarella meant for the cardinal, but mixed into the wrong cups. Alexander VI's papacy represented the absolute nadir of papal corruption. He sold church offices, hosted orgies, fathered children he openly acknowledged may have committed incest, and turned the Vatican into headquarters for a criminal enterprise. The Reformation, which would split Christianity forever, was directly fueled by outrage over popes like Alexander VI. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door in 1517, he was rebelling against the church that Alexander VI embodied: corrupt, worldly, obsessed with money and power rather than salvation. Alexander didn't just corrupt himself, he damaged the entire institution of the papacy so severely that millions would eventually leave the Catholic Church entirely. The name Borgia became synonymous with everything dark in human nature: ambition, incest, murder, betrayal, and corruption. Alexander VI proved that the papacy, meant to be the spiritual heart of Christendom, could fall into the hands of someone who treated it as personal property to be exploited for family gain. That's why Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, is the darkest pope in history. Not just for what he did, but for what he represented: the complete corruption of an institution that claimed divine authority. He turned the throne of St. Peter into a criminal enterprise, and the consequences would reshape Christianity forever. And there you have it, history lovers, the 8 worst popes of the Renaissance. So, what do you think? Which of these cunning popes shocked you the most? Did we miss any Renaissance popes that deserve a mention? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this little stroll through the Renaissance Catholic Church's darkest leaders, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and ring the bell so you never miss another scandalous dive into history. Until next time, keep exploring the epic, the beautiful, and yes, the absolutely terrifying world of the Renaissance.